last week talking about subsequent events, right? And so the key thing, subsequent events, there are two types of subsequent events, right? Subsequent events that are type 1, and there are subsequent events that are type 2. Well, type 1 subsequent events are going to require adjustment to the financial statements, whereas type 2 subsequent events will, disclosure is advised, right? So the adjustment to the financial statements are as a result of those conditions existing as of the balance sheet date. So because the conditions existed as of the balance sheet date, the fact that they occurred subsequently would necessitate an adjustment to the financial statement, such as if a customer went bankrupt on January 4th, right? That condition likely existed at the balance sheet date because the customer is just not going to go bankrupt. There was probably evidence that there was a collectability issue with that customer prior to the date that the customer declared bankruptcy. Versus if a client decides that they're going to acquire another company on January 4th, that condition did not exist on the balance sheet date, but it's information that would be relevant to users of the financial statements, so it would be advised that the client disclose that information in a notice of financial statements. Okay, so with that being said, let's look at problem 1164 to kind of recap that. So 1164 can be found on page 534. Okay, let's take a look at these. So what we have here, we have a situation where the auditor, the company acquired another company on January 8th, which is after the balance sheet date. Date is 12/31. The auditor issued their report on February 7th, or dated their report, I'm sorry, on February 7th, and the report was released on February 14th. So events that occur between the balance sheet date and the date that the auditor dates their audit report is considered what? Subsequent. And if it's after the report, between the date of the report and the release date, or after the release date is considered. Right. So, and the importance in that is that the auditor's treatment or the auditor's requirement is different based on the date that they become aware of the event and at what phase they are in terms of releasing the report or dating or signing off on the audit. So with that in mind, for January 10th, what kind of event is it? Subsequent event. Okay, so what's the auditor's responsibility? Yes.
Adjustment.
Why is it an adjustment? What's the adjustment that the auditor is going to make?
To put the acquisition on the statement.
But they acquired the company after, right? Did that condition exist as of the balance sheet date? Because that's when you adjust. You adjust if the condition existed as of the balance sheet date, right? If the balance sheet date is 12/31, is that acquisition, that's not a condition that existed, right? They might have been talking, but you don't acquire the company until you acquire the company, right? So that in that case, it would be a type 2. So you would disclose it. So remember, if the condition exists as of the balance sheet date, right, even though the event occurred subsequently, it will require adjustment to the financial statements. That's a type 1. If it did not exist as of the balance sheet date, then it's a type 2, and disclosure is advised. So in that case, the auditor would request that the client disclose that information. What about February 10th? So this is after the date the auditor signed off on the audit opinion.
Subsequently discovered fact.
Yes, it's a subsequently discovered fact. So it's after the date that the auditor signs off on the audit work, which is February 7th. That's the audit report date, but before the release date, right? So what action should the auditor take? What are they required to do?
Disclose it.
That require the client to disclose it. So they would have to consider, whether or not, what are the disclosure requirements, so they have to evaluate, is this something that's significant enough to be disclosed, which it is, and then they would advise that the client disclose it in the financial statement. But what, does the auditor have any responsibility beyond that? Right, because what if it's disclosed in the financial statements and the auditor is dated the report February 7th. What do you think that's going to convey to a user?
If they edit it like after they produced it.
But the user doesn't know that, right? The user just knows that that's in the financial statements. So what auditors would normally do in a situation like this is dual date the report, right? Because they don't want to go back and just do if they go back and they do additional evidence and find additional evidence and so forth, or if they're just focused on that and they don't change the report date or dual date the report, right? Then that expands from a user's perspective. That expands to everything. So you want to dual date the report, and you can see an example of how that would be reflected in the auditor's report. If you look at page 519, it gives an example of what a dual date would look like. So here, this is an example where EY found out the subsequently discovered fact, which it disclosed, the company disclosed the offering in their footnotes, right? So EY dual dated the report November 13, 2001, which is the date that they completed the audit, except for note 19, as to which the date is December 6, 2001. And what the auditor is doing there is limiting their responsibility to just what the information, the audit evidence, and the information reported as of November. In this case, they have whatever the year end was, right? So as of the report date for November, and then except for this one item in November that is December 6th. So they're only taking responsibility for that item, because what happens if there's anything else that happened in that period after the date that they signed off that they just did not become aware of, now they're held responsible for it, unless they dual date their report, to be very specific about what they're taking responsibility for.
But then what if they like dual date it and like there was another event that occurred during that time that didn't show
But
up?
they didn't, right, they're not taking responsibility for that. They didn't become
So it's like
aware of it.
specific to that, just that event.
Right.
Okay.
Because it could be anything that happens, right?
Yeah.
And so then that's the importance of the date that you're signing off. You're saying that I've looked at audit evidence supporting information, transactions, and events that occurred normally as of 12/31, right? That's what you're saying. So that's what you're doing. So if these things happen after, the auditor is not responsible if it did not come to, you can't hold them responsible for things they did not. Because they're not expected to audit beyond 12/31,
Yeah.
right? So, but if something does come to their attention, then they have to handle it, right? They have to speak to it, depending on whether it impacts, it requires disclosure or it requires adjustment. And that's why they do it, to limit their responsibility for that exact reason. Okay. What about February 20th, which is after the release date? Would that be considered?
Would that also be subsequently discovered?
Right, it would be a subsequently discovered fact, and what's the auditor's responsibility in this case? Because after the report has been released to the public, yes.
Do the same thing like full day and disclosure.
Well, at this point, you've already issued the report, so you can't dual date, right? Because you've already, so the difference between this February 10th and February 20th, right, is that you haven't released, as of February 10th, you haven't released the report. The report's is released on the 14th, but now you released the report, so you can't go back and dual date. So what the auditor has to do in that event is evaluate the situation and determine whether or not this is information that, the people are still relying on the report. This is information that's important. They would advise the client to either reissue their financial statements, disclose the information. That's what they would do. They would request that the client disclose the information, right? So it's given that the client's already released their financial information, they would have to reissue their financial statements with that disclosure. What happens if the client refuses? What's the auditor's responsibility? Do they just throw their hands up and say, okay, well, it's your financial statement? What do you think would happen if it was an issue and then they found out that the auditors knew about it and did nothing?
Do they withdraw their opinion?
They could, but they wouldn't want it. What they could do before they do that, right, is they could issue a notification. They have to alert they're required to alert the standard regulatory bodies, right? So it's public health company, SEC. So they would have to alert them, as well as others who rely on the financial statement. So the most times, if it's a public health company, that's people who the company files the 10K. So it's outside shareholders, investors in the company. So they would send a notification and identify it. What about the event on March 2nd? What's the difference between the event on March 2nd and the event on January 8th? They're both acquisitions, but what's the difference? Yes.
On March 2nd, like it's an announcement that they will do it like in the future, whereas January 8th, like they did the acquisition.
Right. So the key there, you're on the right track. The key is January 8th is before the report, the financial statements were released. Right. So it's an event that occurred before the release of the financial statements. Remember, financial statements were not released until the 14th. Right, so there's still that window to respond to that subsequent event, or subsequently discovered fact. But after the report release date, it's the financial statement's been released. So when did this happen after the financial statement? So the auditor has no responsibility. This is, the client, this would be a news announcement. And actually, if it's a public company, it's going to be reported in their quarterly statements anyway. Questions about differences between subsequent events and subsequently discovered facts? So the key is in identifying one, the subsequent event. Is it a condition that existed as of the balance sheet date? And if it did, then that requires adjustment. If it didn't, that's a type 2, and its disclosure is advisable. And then looking at subsequently discovered facts is looking at the timeline between the auditor's report date and the date that the report is released, or looking at those two dates, the timeline. So, rep letters, written representation. So basically, remember, clients are responsible for the financial statements, clients are responsible for internal controls over financial reporting. It's the client's environment. The auditor relies on the client to provide them with explanations of transactions and events that have occurred. So the client is making certain representations to the auditor. Those representations are formalized in a management rep letter. And so it's to impress the objective, impress upon management what their responsibility is, their financial statements. And they're responsible for the assertions. They're responsible for ensuring that they're reporting transactions and events and account balances and disclosures in accordance with GAAP. To remind management of potential misstatements or omissions in the financial statement so that they're responsible for those. Like, it's not the auditor's responsibility to come in and find those. Right? Management should have a process in place to identify or prevent or detect those types of errors from occurring. And then it also documents management's responses regarding various inquiries the auditor makes. So recall that inquiry of the client is an audit procedure. There's no way that you conduct the audit. You can conduct an audit without talking to the client. Right? And there are certain things that, yes, the auditor tries to find corroborating evidence, but there's, management inquiries or responses to the auditor's inquiries become a part of the working papers. It's a form of an audit procedure. So if a management is not willing to provide this information to the auditors, that can be considered a scope limitation. And then the auditor will consider disclaiming an opinion on the financial statements. We will talk about that on Thursday. We'll talk about audit reports. So again, it's management taking responsibility for their role in the financial reporting process. So typically what you find in the rep letter is obviously information about management's responsibility for the financial statements, basically saying that the disclosures are appropriate, they're presented, it's reasonable, that any errors or misstatements, that they are aware they've been corrected. And if they haven't been corrected, then they're immaterial. So let's take a look at of what the rep letter looks like. And so recall, this is from the client to the auditor. So if you look at exhibit 11.3 on page 511, and you'll see that the rep letter is pretty detailed. It's addressed to the auditors and to the partner, the engagement partner. And you'll see here, it talks about the management's responsibility for the financial statements. Also, it talks about representations related to the disclosures and the amounts of information provided in the financial statements. They assert to the auditor that we provided you with access to all information, additional information that you requested from us for the purpose of the audit, that they've given the auditors unrestricted access to people within the entity in order for the auditor to obtain evidence, that the transactions have been recorded in the books and records, and they're reflected in the financial statements, and they disclosed to them the results of their assessment of the risk that the financial statements may be materially misstated as a result of fraud. Also, there's representations related to internal controls over financial reporting, because remember, again, for publicly held companies, management has to, in addition to the auditor's opinion on controls over financial reporting, management also issues a report on their assessment of the effectiveness of internal controls and taking responsibility for internal controls. And then it so goes into talk about the effectiveness of internal controls, that it's done, the framework is based on a COSO framework, that they perform an assessment, a conclusion they make about the effectiveness of internal controls, that they disclose to the auditor any deficiencies, and then the representation letter is signed and provided, is provided and signed by management, right? You'll see here it's the CEO and the CFO, and it's typically who you would see respond, because the SOX requires that management, CEO and CFO take responsibility for the financial statements. So that's provided to the auditor. And as I said before, if management is unwilling to provide this representation letter, that is considered to be a scope limitation. So this is, again, is the final phases of the audit. This becomes an important document in the audit work paper. So an auditor would never not get a representation letter from the client. That's just not acceptable. All right, let's take a look at a problem, 1154. Which is on page 529. It starts on 529 and goes through to 530. And just indicate whether it's what the statement is appropriate in the management rep letter or inappropriate. So you should refer to exhibit 11.3 as you read through those statements. Exhibit 11.3 on page 511 is the management reference. An example. You know what, let's just walk through them together in the interest of time. So what about the first thing? Certain representation in this letter described as being limited to matters that are materials. Is that appropriate?
I think it's appropriate because auditors just provide us with assurance about materials.
Right. So that's what they're concerned about, what's material. What about B? Appropriate, inappropriate?
Appropriate.
I'm sorry? What? Why? Say that, speak up.
It's not the management duty to say that there was no control.
Well, remember, a part of their responsibilities of the controls is right to prevent or detect whether due to errors or fraud. So they do have a responsibility with fraud. So you're right, it's inappropriate, but not because it's not their responsibility. Right? It's inappropriate because they cannot say that there are no flaws. It's not an absolute. There's no, unless management can tell you that we looked at every single transaction, we have perfect internal controls, there are no inherent limitations to our internal controls, they cannot tell you that there's no fraud. So the best that they can say, to our knowledge, no frauds have occurred. And that we have an effective system of internal controls that would prevent or detect on a timely basis errors due to fraud. Misstatements due to fraud or errors. Okay, so that's what makes that inappropriate. Is the there's no absolute thing that they can say. What about C? I heard something, but I don't know. I don't know if I heard appropriate or inappropriate.
It's appropriate.
Why? Why do you think
Because
so?
they don't say it's perfect, they just say it's effective. But that doesn't mean that there weren't any mess ups.
Exactly. What's the matter? Yeah.
She's having a hard day.
I'm like, how am I'm not gonna know that. Like,
Well, let's look at let's just look at B and C. Right? So what do you know? It is management's responsibility to provide an effective system of control. Right? They have to represent that. So, and they said, based on our assessment, we conclude that because they have to perform an assessment of control. So we conclude that we maintain an effective system of internal controls. So they're not saying that there's no deficiency. They're only speaking to this system of internal controls. Right? That is, they have a process. They should have a process in place to evaluate, such as internal audit.
So it's like, so we're basing it off the fact that like they do have an appropriate process and like there is.
It's like work.
So we're basing it on the fact that, so what we're trying to determine, so the auditor's not, that's one thing, right? But remember, the auditor's testing internal control.
Yeah.
Right.
So like,
so if management makes an incorrect statement, right, then the auditor knows, auditors test internal controls. If they know that controls are ineffective, right, or there's an area where controls are ineffective, that has to be reported in the auditor's report. So now so auditors are not going to accept the rep letter that says, oh, our controls are effective. All right, makes sense? What about D? Appropriate? Why do you think it's appropriate? What makes it appropriate?
So they use the opinion of an attorney.
I'm sorry, say it again?
They use the opinion of a lawyer, attorney. So it's a valid statement.
But what does that state? All right.
I was gonna say inappropriate because shouldn't that be coming from the attorney?
Right. But also, the statement really doesn't tell you much, right? What the statement tells you is that we provided our attorneys with a description of contingencies and an evaluation. First of all, management is not, they wouldn't be able to do that, but they evaluated certain contingencies for which our attorneys have devoted substantial attention on our behalf in the form of legal representation. That doesn't tell you anything about contingencies, right? About what's reported in the financial statements or disclosed in the financial statements related to contingencies. That just tells you that they sent their attorneys, they provided their attorneys with information.
I guess the attorneys are going to understand.
Right, but this is the management rep letter. So what you're describing will be in the attorney's letter, right, which is a form of audit evidence.
So you think the statement is not appropriate?
It's not appropriate, right? It doesn't tell you anything, right? It doesn't provide.
Just the statement.
Right, but remember what the objective of the representation letter is, right? Is to provide auditors, management takes responsibility for the financial statements and information reported in the financial statements, as well as information about internal controls, right? So this doesn't tell you anything. That just tells you what they provided their attorneys with. Okay, what about E?
not appropriate.
Why?
Because it says like they stated as for a fact that there are no significant deficiencies, but they don't know that. Or do they?
Well, here's the thing, right? So again, you're kind of on the right track. It's so absolute.
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, you cannot say with certainty, because auditors don't say with certainty there are no material weaknesses or deficiencies, right? Because their report is, and we'll see this when we talk about reports, their reports are worded in such a way to say that, basically we don't test 100%. So what management is providing here is 100% of the way it's worded right now, and they're not able to do that. Okay. What about F? what's F talking about?
Their corrective actions.
Okay. And that's relevant to what?
Prior. Yeah.
First of all, if there were significant or material adjustments that were required in prior audits, then they should have been in the prior audit, right? They would have been reflected in the prior financial statements. So anything that management is responding to here would be, auditors' recommendations on how, we audited internal controls and we see where you can, design this control more appropriately. Something. It's like, it's not, they don't have to, management we'll talk about this in a moment. Auditors provide management with, kind of at the end, a management letter, right? That basically says, here's some of the things that we know is based on, they're not material to the financial statement. They're just a real, we offer something other than an opinion, right? We provide some, these are the things that we just noted that could help you, basically, right? So management is under no obligations to respond to that, and certainly those are not the things that should be represented in the management. That's not where they belong. They don't have to respond to the auditor, and they don't have to make a representation about those things to the auditor. Yes.
I'm so kind of confused by that. So is it not appropriate because you don't list the action statement?
Well, it doesn't belong in the management letter, and you don't have to. Right? So the management letter is really about, again, financial statements, your responsibility, that you're aware that there are no material statements that haven't been corrected, the controls are effective, and so forth. Responding to auditor suggestions that could help you, right, are not a part of the management letter. That's just the management rec letter, I should say. Right? The management letter is just like a service that the auditor provides, because they've been in there and they kind of take an objective look at the financial statement. Some recommendations. Anything material related to the controls or material relating to financial statements, if it's material, it's reflected in the financial statements. What about G?
Not really.
Right.
Good job.
Right? This is absolutely right. Not appropriate. All right, and finally H.
Yeah, appropriate.
Right. That's
They have to do that,
That's
right?
what, right. That's what you're supposed to do. Right. Right. So that's appropriate. So again, it's just the management, when you think about the management rep letter, think about management is representing, these are our financial statements. We understand that. We understand that we have to have controls around our financial statements. We understand that you rely on the information that we're giving you, and we've given you unfettered access to our information. We've reported anything that we're aware of, right? Frauds or deficiencies that we're aware of, we've reported those to you. And anything that's incorrect, we're not saying that there are no errors in the financial statements, but we're saying to our knowledge, there are no material errors in the financial statements. Going concern. Right. So the auditor, during the planning phase, the auditor is going to become aware of any issues the client might be having with respect to their ability to continue as a going concern. So the fact that we're discussing this at the completion of the audit is not because, that's when the auditor found it out, right? When the audit goes in and they're doing planning, think about the planning process, understanding the entity, performing analytical procedures. The auditor is going to be aware throughout the audit that the client might be experiencing going concern issues. And So what they're doing at this stage is taking a step back and considering whether or not the evidence that they've collected continues to raise questions about the client's ability to continue as a going concern. So if they feel that the client has mitigated that, and so in other words, the client is, has options in place. So let's say that they're experiencing operating issues, right, where they're not generating enough cash flow, but that the client has a process in place where maybe they've reached out to lenders and they've gotten a commitment to, secure a loan. So if there's evidence that the auditor is made aware of as they're going through the audit process, that would indicate that they've mitigated at least, and it doesn't have to be for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, it's that 1 year. So the auditor is going to look at, is there an issue January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019, where there's concerns that for that 1 year period, they're not going to be able to continue. They're not going to be able to, there's a substantial doubt about their ability to continue as a going concern. And so the auditor evaluates the evidence, and if the concerns do not remain, then there's no impact on the financial statements, right, on the report, the auditor's report. However, if the auditor continues to have concerns, then they're going to be required to disclose that back in the audit opinion. And so I'll hold off on talking about that because we'll cover what that opinion looks like when we talk about audit reports. But that's their responsibility to alert the users of the financial statements that there's a concern about the company's ability to continue as a going concern. And as I said before, it only extends to a year, right? They're not looking 2, 3, 4 years out. Right, so, and also you have to keep in mind too, that clients are where they're experiencing going concern. So they're trying to address that issue. And throughout the entire audit, they're probably dealing with it before the auditors even come in. So the auditors will, have the information available. So as I said before, as a part of their initial planning process, they update their assessment based on the audit evidence, and they can also perform analytical procedures that, remember, at the end of the audit, in this phase of the audit, it's more to kind of evaluate the evidence that they have collected and see if it makes sense, and make an assessment, and based on their assessment, it will impact how they report that in the audit report. And usually clients will, if there are, some going concern issues, clients will probably, because they're trying to present a picture, because they don't want to go out of business, they don't want to go bankrupt. So they would disclose information in their footnotes as well, the financial statements about the status. Adjusting journal entries. So the auditor, as they're going through the audit, they identify adjusting entries. They create what they call an over-under list. Clearly, if a journal entry is material, quantitatively material or qualitatively material, the auditor will require the client to book it. But as you accumulate an over-under list, right, there could be journal entries that by themselves are not material. But when you look at it, all of those journal entries, the cumulative effect of those journal entries could be have a material impact on the financial statements. And so that's what the auditor, that's what we call the over-under list in some audits, right? The impact of, the cumulative impact of the adjustments that the auditors accumulate as they are conducting the audit. So there are two methods. If you take a look at Exhibit 11.4, right? There's the rollover method, which considers only the current year income effect. So if you look at Exhibit 11.4 and 515, that is the 7,410. Right? Meaning you consider that only. If you use the Iron Curtain method, you're going to consider prior period adjustments as well. So you're going to look at the cumulative effect of uncorrected misstatements from prior periods. and that's, and on the exhibit 11.4, that would be reflected in the number 25,410. And so based on that, the auditor will determine whether or not that meets the threshold for the materiality level they set. So the auditor could decide basically which method they're going to use. However, SEC, Staff Accounting Bulletin 108, requires the adjustments to be proposed if they're material under either approach. So they're required, they have to, so basically the auditor calculates this based on both approaches, and if either one of the approaches are considered, if it's material under either one of the approaches, they would be required to report the adjustments to the financial statements. The other thing is for the importance of adjustments, that auditors have to communicate the adjustments, all adjustments to the audit committee. And explain their rationale for why things were waived, and most times, depending on the client, right, the challenge that auditors have is not the immaterial adjustments, right? Because clients, they're not concerned if it's immaterial, it's immaterial. Right? Most times, I should say most times, they might more likely book those adjustments because they're not going to materially impact the financial statements, right? Because what they're concerned about publicly held companies is the impact on the EPS, right? Or numbers that they release to the market. And so those are not going to materially distort those numbers or change those numbers, and they're not going to. It's when it's material that they have the biggest challenge, right? And so that's the case where the auditor really has no wiggle room, because if it's material, you have to report it. You have to require the client to report it, because the auditors don't report the adjustments to the client's financial statements. So finally, audit documentation. So audit documentation review obviously is an important aspect of the audit engagement, and the concern here is that things that audit procedures have been performed in accordance with the auditing standards, in accordance with the firm's quality control standards, that the work papers make sense, that they support the conclusion for that area. So if you're auditing internal controls over a revenue process and you can conclude that the controls are effective, then the work papers that you have documenting that should support that conclusion. And that's what the audit supervisor is going to look at, and that you complied with it, you perform the audit procedures sufficiently and effectively. The audit manager and partner are going to perform more of a higher level review. So they're looking at, is the overall scope of the audit adequate, right? Not so much, they're not going to dig too much into details. And also, does the work papers, right, the results of the audit evidence that we collected, is that sufficient to support our opinion? So obviously, audit managers and partners are looking at the more challenging areas. So you really depending on the size of the engagement, but you're not going to have the partner actually spending time reviewing internal controls unless it's an important area, a more complex area. Say, for example, controls over fair value measurement, which tends to be more complex. So they're going to focus more on the higher risk areas in their review. And then the review partner is a partner who does not have day-to-day responsibility for the audit engagement. And so that's a person that's going to come in and really look at the quality of the work from the firm's perspective. Is it done in accordance with the firm's quality control standards? Does the opinion support, is the opinion supported by the evidence collected? So that person is probably going to look at the more complex subjective areas, right, where there's more judgment involved, to look at the rationale, because that's important. What's important with judgments is that you're able to document the rationale for how you reach that judgment. Because we've seen this, right? We could look at the same set of facts and come up with a different conclusion based on how we interpret the facts. Right? So you want so for those areas is where auditors are, that's where they have greater risk. When it's more subjective areas. So engagement quality reviews are going to look at those types of spend time work, reviewing those types of issues. And so remember this from the generally accepted auditing standards. This is an important part of the firm's quality control process. So just final steps. Now we've completed the audit, we looked at adjusting entries, we looked at subsequent events, and so forth. Now the auditor has to issue the audit report, which we'll talk about on Thursday, the different scenarios that auditors face and how those scenarios impact the audit opinion and the audit report. And so the audit report is what most people are looking at. They get the company's financial statements, but they want to know, did they pass? Like there's, some things I've read, studies I've read, the focus group, people look at the audit opinion as some type of pass-fail. Did they pass? So did they get a clean opinion? Then if they got a clean opinion, it's considered a pass. If they didn't get a clean opinion, then it's a problem, right? They fail. So people go to that audit report and zone in on the audit opinion. So that's what they're most important, most focused on. The auditors are also responsible for communicating with the audit committee and management. So remember, for publicly held companies, the audit committee is responsible for the oversight of the audit. They can hire and fire auditors, not management. So the auditors have to report to the audit committee. To the extent that the auditors become aware of fraud or illegal acts, they have to communicate that. And so that's not to imply that they wait until the end of the audit. Clearly, if they identify a fraud or an illegal act during earlier in the audit engagement, they would communicate that immediately. They're not going to sit on it until the end of the audit. Same thing, internal control deficiencies. So internal control deficiencies may not rise to the level of being a material weakness. And so again, a material weakness would be that the controls that were absent were not sufficient because they were absent to prevent or detect a material misstatement, and as a result of that, that's considered a material weakness. So the auditor, in auditing internal controls, have to determine whether or not the control deficiencies rise to that level. Then, as I said, the communication with the audit committee, and then management letters. And the management letter is different from the rep letter. The management letter is what the auditor provides to the client. And the management letter is basically, as I said before, the auditor providing the client with some insight, things that they found out that might be helpful. And the auditors have to be really careful about that because of the requirements around consulting services, and being very careful that they're not crossing the line. Right? So again, it's just more basic type of things to just bring to the client's attention based on the auditor's experience, just based on the auditor providing an independent kind of, not oversight, but independent look at how they're doing things based on their knowledge from their expertise based on other clients that they've worked with. So it's just more like a service that they provide to say, look, we do more than just but they have to be very careful that it does not cross over in the line of prohibited advisory services. So just a summary of the audit communications. The engagement letter, remember, the engagement letter was something we talked about in the planning stage, right? And that's the contract between the auditor and the client. And it lays out what the auditors are going to do, what the expectations are of the client. So it lays out the terms of the audit engagement. The acceptance letter is exactly what it is. It sounds like it's the client sends the acceptance letter to the auditor, and both the engagement letter and the acceptance letter occurs prior to the engagement starting. The attorney's letter, remember, is what the client requests that their attorney provide the auditor with information about litigation or claims, pending litigation and claims. And so that letter comes from the attorney through request of the client directly to the auditors. And it's done near the date of the audit report because it's the balance sheet, impact. You want to make sure that you, which is why the attorney's letters normally go out toward the end of the audit, right? You want to make sure that you have identified any pending litigations or claims that could have an impact, that should be either disclosed in the financial statements or the financial statements adjusted to report a contingency. I talked about written representations, is what the client provides the auditors, their responsibility, the client's responsibility for the financial statements and internal controls, and then serving to the auditors that we provided you with all the information, we answered your made available to you people that you need to speak with, and that is issued as of the date of the auditor's report. And so that's the date, remember the date of the auditor's report is the date that the auditor ends field work, meaning when they feel confident that they've collected sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. And then the internal control deficiencies, that the auditors communicate that to the audit committee, management, and that is prior to the audit report release date. And so remember, the auditor also issues a report on internal controls, right, which we'll discuss whether or not there are any material weaknesses that have to be reported in that report. And then the communication with the audit committee is usually after the audit report day, and after the audit, and that's usually at the board meeting or a meeting with that's called specifically to meet with the audit committee to discuss debrief on the audit engagement and discuss the audit engagement. And then the management letter, which is what the auditor issues to the client with suggestions on things that they can improve. And that's usually done after the audit, and it's written. It's rarely, it's probably, I talk about it, but the idea is it's going to be something that's written and provided to the client. So let's look at one more problem before the break, which basically summarizes what we talked about during the completion phase. So it's problem 1171, which is on page 537 to 538. So what do you think? What's A? What should the auditor do?
Type 1. So we should adjust 1.
Right. So they become aware of the information, right, as a part of the evidence gathering, which is that the client is the customer's experiencing difficulty. So it's not that the customer went bankrupt, but they're experiencing financial difficulty, so they should reserve for it. So they should propose an adjustment to reserve, to increase the reserve. So what's this? Is this fine? No issue? Problem? What?
Isn't it like wrong? Because how are you gonna like not give the correct date and then
Exactly. Right. So remember, this is the management representation letter, right?
yeah.
So the representation letter has to be dated as of the audit report date. And the audit report date is when the auditors decide that they've completed the audit. And in this case, Carmelo completed the audit February 9th. So the audit report will be dated February 9th. So the rep letter has to also be dated February 9th.
So in this case, like, should they have like just waited until like they came back?
Well, they could just require the client to reissue a letter. So that you date the letter appropriately.
Oh.
make the representations as of that date. Because remember, the management rec letter goes in the audit work papers as documentation. And that's a part of the evidence. So you can't put that rec letter in there with a date that's prior to the date that you completed you signed off on the audit. See, I'll let you read that. So what's this story here?
Don't they have to reissue it?
Wow.
Because it had been, the lawsuit was settled before the financial statements were released. So it should have been subsequently discovered.
So what's the key? Look at the last sentence.
Oh, so then, we have to do
I
it.
mean, it's not material. But if the auditors determine that it's not material, then you're not issue financial statements if it's material. So this is an example of a subsequently discovered fact, but because it's not material, it's not going to have a material impact on the financial statements, there will be no need to false financial statements of the issue. All right, what do you think? What kind of, yes?
Is it subsequent event type 2? Disclose it?
Right. So, and here's the challenge, right, is you know that there's going to be there's a loss, right? It's after the balance sheet date, it's a subsequent event, right? It didn't exist as of the balance sheet. So in this case, disclosure would be recommended. And also because they don't know exactly how, what the insurance is going to cover. Like they might recover a higher amount. So in this case, the auditor would recommend disclosure. And they would probably dual date it. Why? They would dual date this, right? Because they audit on February 10th, right? So they hadn't released, so it occurred, they found out on the 7th, on the 12th, right? So it was after the auditor completed or signed off on the audit, but before the release date, so actually subsequently discovered fact, right? But it's an event that would require, that the auditor would highly suggest disclosure. So if auditor, and one of the things that the auditor would do is go back and evaluate the situation, right? They would look at the situation, make sure that the disclosures were adequate, get information, verify that the amounts can't be estimated and so forth, so that to verify the disclosure is the correct a way to handle it. So they would probably more likely dual date the report, right? So similar to, they would date the report as of the 10th, except for what's disclosed in no X whatever regarding that. Okay, so they would dual date it. Yes.
So did you say it's a subsequent?
Well, a subsequently discovered fact is still a subsequent event. And in this case, you're right that they would disclose it, but what the difference would be, in this case, they would have to dual date it. Right? If the auditor goes back and does additional work, then they would dual date the report. Okay, let's do one more before we break. Yes.
Like, even though it says that it's not like material, there are a lot of misstatements that we think become material. So I think that they should be accounted for.
Right, so this is looking at adjusting entries, right, and accounting for the adjusting entries and then evaluating whether or not those adjusting entries rise to the level of materiality, and also looking at rollover or iron curtain method. And if it's a publicly held company, right, that they're subject to SEC rulings or statements, and so they would have to evaluate both the iron curtain method as well as the rollover method, and evaluate whether there's any materiality. The other thing is they also have to report adjustments. No, it's not the company's decision as to what is not material, it's the auditor's decision. And the auditor is responsible, as long as the adjustments are not trivial, they're responsible to communicate those adjustments with those individuals charged with governance, in this case,